I wanted to share with you, to start off with, a poem by Yehuda Amichai, and it goes as follows. Open, closed, open. Before we are born, everything is open. In the universe without us. For as long as we live, everything is closed within us. And when we die, everything is open again. Open, closed, open. That's all we are. And that comes from a collection. I wasn't one of the 6 million. Yehuda Amichai is an Israeli poet who was obsessed by the Shoah. Now, I want to quote for you a Zohar, and the Zohar Chodosh says on the Song of Songs, Ukeshenichnasu Yisrael le'eretz nistam hapatuach. When Israel entered the land, the open was sealed, the niftach hasatum, and the sealed was open. Nistam haper, the mouth was sealed, for speech had ceased, opposite of a human being. And niftach hatabur, the navel became opened, the navel referring to the temple. From there, the temple, from the navel, the fetus eats what his mother eats, drinks what his mother drinks, and the entire world is nourished from the drippings of the lands of Israel. Shoter mima she'imo shoter, ochel mima she'ima ochelet, v'chol ha'olam nizon mitamtzis Eretz Yisrael. I think that he had that in mind. Open, closed, open. And that churban of Eretz Yisrael brings us to the concept today that I want to share with you, and that is, we'll start with this concept of the feminine divine, and the proof text that we go to is from the Zohar. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu sought to destroy the house below and the Holy Land, he first removed the Holy Land above and brought her down from the rung from which she was drinking, from the holy heaven. So what is this business? Avor lahai ara kadisha de le'ela v'kadmisa. He brought something down from above. Everything in the Zohar is paralleled. Whatever is down here is paralleled upstairs. So something he's bringing down. And then we learn that Rabbi Shimon tells his companions, Yom echad azli chavraya imad Rabbi Shimon, Amar Rabbi Shimon, Hamina alen amin kulai alai b'Yisrael tata. So he says that the nations are elevated and Israel is the lowest of them all in Galut. Why? Maitama. Begin de malka ajde lematrunisa mine, because the king has cast away the matronisa, va'ayil imahu ba'asra, and replaced her with another slave girl. Who is this matronisa that we're talking about? And who is the slave girl? Well, we learn from Proverbs, right? Tachas shalosh rog za'aretz v'tachas arba lo tochel, tachta abdi ki mloch v'nava kish melecha, tachas snua ki tiva v'shivcha ki tirash gevirta. The slave girl inherits her matron, and man shivcha. So what is this shivcha? What is this slave girl? And he says the slave girl is a foreign keter, a foreign crown. So God basically has replaced the Shekhinah and sent her down into exile with Am Yisrael and replaced her with a slave girl. It's a very dramatic Zohar that tells us that first of all, that the divine is gendered between masculine and feminine. And secondly, that this Matronisa follows the fortunes of Klal Yisrael. She doesn't stay upstairs with God, but she has to follow the fortunes of Klal Yisrael. Okay, why does this interest me? Because I've been talking about Shekhinah consciousness now for a number of years. In part of the 12-step program of spiritual recovery, one of the most dramatic moments in the 12-step program is the second step, which says that I came to believe in a power greater than myself. And in the 12-step program, the problem that most people who have grown up with this notion of the divine have a very toxic notion of the divine, an Old Testament punishing God. And that's part of the recovery program, is that step 2, where they come to believe in a power greater, but that is a power greater that's all loving, that is unconditional. And I could never get past that step. What does it mean to believe in a power greater that's all loving? I never grew up with that kind of God. The Ribono Shel Olam, you have to give Tsar Onesh, comes along Yom Kippur, Al Chet Shechatonu. That concept of a divine loving God never hit me until I started learning the mystical side of Judaism and realized that in this gendered divine, the Matronisa, the Shekhinah, known as the Matronisa, the matron, in fact, comes Onochi imcha batzara. I'm with you in Galut. I'm with you everywhere. The feminine divine was a healing concept for me that I could latch onto. And so I called it Shekhinah consciousness, because most of us are not aware of the fact that the divine is gendered between the masculine and the feminine, B, that the Lurianic myth makes the outrageous claim that the reason for Galut is that the Matronisa, as we just learned it in the Zohar, was banished from upstairs and sent into the netherworld, and God replaced her with this slave girl, which is Malchus of all the kingdoms of the world that have hegemony over Am Yisrael in Galut. And then the outrageous claim of the Arizal, raising the stakes of Judaism, that the way to fix Galut is to reunite the Malchut with the Shekhinah, l'shem yichud, in order to reunite HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the Shekhinah. Every mitzvah is preceded by this Lurianic aphorism, l'shem yichud kudsha brichu Shekhinah. I'm doing this mitzvah for the sake of reuniting the Matronisa, the Shekhinah, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because that will end this exile. It's an absolutely stunning myth that has overtaken us, both in the Orthodox world, meaning the world of normative Judaism, and in the heretical world of Shabtai Tzvi and Frank, and in the world in between the two, which is the Hasidic world, which negotiates, for me, the space between the heretical world and the normative world. Some, including the Vilna Gaon, felt that was heresy and put the Hasidim in Cherem. He did it because he saw how close that was to the heretical view. Because Rambam would be turning in his grave if he heard of any of this kind of anthropomorphic notion of the feminine divine. And yet for me, it was a healing step, this step 2 in the recovery process, that I came to believe in a power greater that could and would restore me to sanity. Are you kidding me? He doesn't give a hang about me. He wants to punish me. That's the image I had growing up. And so this was a very healing text. Now let's look at a piece of Gemara. And this piece of Gemara, Alan and I were struggling with because it is so outrageous, the way it was looked upon by the Hasidic master. Now, the Gemara is a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. It's a famous Gemara. Gemara Rosh Hashanah talks about the Megillas Tanis. There is a Megillah called the Megillah Tanis, which is a Megillah that includes in it all the small fasts and all the small festivals that we don't even keep. The only two festivals that we keep now is Purim and Hanukkah, but there were many others. And so the Gemara tells us about one of those festivals that we don't no longer keep, but it gives us a very cryptic background. And it said, Be'esrim Utmane Bey, on the 28th of Adar, between Purim and Pesach, there was a festival. Wow, I didn't know anything about that. Tell me about that festival. Oh, you know what happened? Asa b'shurta tavta liyehudai. Good tidings came to the Jews, the lo yidina maraisa, that they would not have to stop learning Torah. What's the backstory? What's the backstory? Well, we know that the Romans tried to prevent the Jews from fulfilling 3 specific mitzvahs, because the mitzvahs they chose distinguished the Jewish people from all other peoples as the chosen nation of God. And the Marshal tells us that each of these 3 mitzvahs was called a covenant between Am Yisrael and Avinu Shebashamayim. And what were the 3 mitzvahs? Gozru Malchus Gezerah, the regime issued a decree. Shelo Yasku Batorah, they shouldn't engage in Torah study. Shelo Yomulu Espeneim, they shouldn't circumcise their children. V'sheyichalulu es Shabbos, and they should desecrate the Shabbos. So those are the 3 covenantal mitzvahs that the Romans chose very well. Okay. What did Ma'asa Yehuda ben Shammua v'chaver? So what did Yehuda ben Shammua and his colleagues do? How did they do? What did they do? So in the old days, they were just daven. But now they did something different. Something very, very different. What did they do? They marched themselves onto Rome. Holchu v'notlu eitzu mi matrunisa. Now, when the Zohar says matronisa and the Arizal says matronisa as a shechina, that is not what the Gemara meant. Matronisa is a Roman term coming from the Latin matron. Matronisa means, according to Lieberman, a Roman noble woman. A Roman noble woman who owned property and therefore could vote in the Senate. So these colleagues, these Amoraic colleagues who had survived the Churban and now were living in a time of Gezerah, of Shmad, that the Romans decreed upon them, Holchu v'notlu eitza, they went to get advice from this Roman lady, Shekol Gedole Romi Matsuyan Etzla, who was frequented by all the patricians of Rome. She had a salon, and all the politicians would come to her. And they would eat and drink and be merry and maybe did other naughty things there in her salon. And these Amoraic rabbis took a boat from Yerushalayim or from Yavne or from Tseporis, and they come to Rome and they knock on the door of this great matronisa. Very important Matronisa, because Kol Gedolei Romi, all the Roman senators would be found next to her. Omro lahem. And so she gives them advice. Bo'u. She doesn't just tell them, go back and daven. That's not what she tells them. She gives them practical advice. Bo'u v'hafginu balaylu. You have to go and do a protest. You have to have a protest. You've got to stand outside the patricians of Rome in front of the Senate and protest. Bo'u v'hifginu balaylu. So go and cry out in the nighttime. Holchu v'hifginu balaylu. Okay, so they went and cried out in the night. Now, what did they say? What did they say? It's an absolutely stunning story, lasting only a few lines, and nevertheless tells us why Am Yisrael made a minor festival out of that day. They went and cried out at night. And what did they say? Let's take the next. Let's share you the next piece of Gemara. They said as follows. They cried out at night, saying, O heavens, are we not your brothers? Are we not children of one father? Ma nishtanu mikol umos v'loshon. How are we different from every other nation and tongue that you issue such harsh decrees against us? I mean, this is the carrion cry throughout Golus. Every time we had a problem in Galut, this is exactly our answer, right? What are you doing? Why are we different? And what happened? Upitlum. As a result of that protest, the Romans abolished the decrees for Osa Yom Asu Yontov, and they made a Yontov on the 28th of Adar as a festival where you cannot fast on that day. Who is this Yehuda ben Shamua? He's a relatively unknown hero. The Gemara says that he's a student of Rabbi Meir, who was one of a small group who survived the Hadrianic persecutions and continued the work of his teacher, Rabbi Akiva. Another student of Rabbi Akiva, who was also killed for resisting the decrees, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, could be Yehuda ben Shamua's older brother. Now, the plan that Yehuda ben Shamua followed of the Matronisa stands in stark contrast to the forms of resistance of earlier generations. Against foreign oppressors, as you know, Rabbi Akiva and his protege Bar Kokhba took up arms. At other times, they studied Torah and performed mitzvahs in secret. And at other times, they, like Rabbi Akiva, courted martyrdom. But Yehuda ben Shamua's approach is peaceful and public. The group consults with a matronita, a wealthy Roman woman whose stature is a staple character throughout the Talmud. The matronisa is inquisitive, at times derisive towards Jewish ideas, but she's always imagined in dialogue with the rabbis. And in our story, the matronisa acts like an advocate for the Jews, helping them strategize about the decrees and the ways of the Romans. She doesn't tell them to revolt with arms or to risk death by learning Torah, nor to go underground with their books. Rather, she suggests a political demonstration. They should make their presence felt, lehafgin, to externalize, to vocalize, to in modern Hebrew means to protest, lahafgin, hafgana. And so they go through the streets at night shouting a chant. As humans, we are like you, we deserve better. Why were you persecuting us more than other conquered nations? The chant resonates with other Mishnaic statements that all human life is valuable because we descended from a single ancestor, Adam. And we know a millennium later that Shakespeare, Shylock in The Merchant of Venice would make the similar point. If you prick us, do we not bleed? And in fact, the decree is recalled. Basically the rhetoric that Shamua and his friends use in this hafgana, in this demonstration, is what? We are all children of the same. What does that mean? Well, we know that Rome, according to Chazal, is a progenitor from Esau. So Esau and Jacob are both the children. They are both the progenitors. Jacob is the progenitor of the Jews and Esau the progenitor of the Romans, and they were brothers, and they had the same father Isaac and the same mother Rebekah. These 3 points correspond to the 3 decrees. The brotherhood between the descendants of Jacob is written in the Torah. Isaac, the common father, is the one who circumcised when 8 days old, and Rivka, the common mother, is associated with the Shabbat. Now, Chazal describe Rome as the descendant of the spiritual heir to Esau in many places, especially Pirkei Rebbe Lezer, that I love so much. Okay, this is a wonderful piece of Gemara, but why do I bring it? Let's now look at a stunning piece of Hasidic interpretation. And I'm going to share with you the Chernobyl Rebbe that Alan and I studied to make sense of. And we will look at his commentary on this pericope from Gemara. There are likutim at the end of his commentary on the Bible, where he goes through a number of tractates of Gemara in order to give them a, let's say, a Hasidic twist. And in many times, they are quite radical. But nothing as radical as what we're about to learn. And this goes to my understanding, coming full circle as to Shekhinah consciousness. We've diversed. We started with this very mystical idea of the divine feminine, and then we took a tour through the rational Gemara, and then we are now coming full circle back. Let's come back. V'hifginu b'layla. So they had this hafgana. Omru lo achechem anachnu, etc. We are your brothers. Lahavin zeh. Now, we first have to understand what the hell are they doing going to a matronisa? Lahavin zeh, sheholchu el matronisa, shehoyaso zoina litol eitza mimena. Now, he makes the radical statement that she was a madam. I didn't see that in the Gemara. And when I told the rabbi my problem, that his great-great-grandfather interpreted the word matronisa as a madam, he says, well, they went to her at night, but I still don't buy it. This is a very strong reading of matronisa. Shehoysa Zoina, she had a house of ill repute in Rome. Litol Eitzel Mimena. Why would they go to some hooker to take advice from some woman of ill repute? Couldn't they just have sat there in the base medrash back in Yavne and daven to the Ribono Shalom? Ubifrat al gezerah kazu, especially because of this particular decree, shehu anogea lo yisbar, that has to do with the Brit, as we said before. It relates to God. Shehu ikar kiyum ha'olam v'kavonos habriya. The whole purpose of the world is to learn Torah and to keep Shabbos and Mila. These are the 3 pillars upon which the world will be shattered if we're not kept. So why don't you go straight to the Almighty and go to him and ask him to change the Gezerah? He's all powerful. All right. We had the same question. And we said, well, Ben Shamua was the first time he had an idea to get advice from her. And she said, no. You have to do the following. Do a hafgana. But now see what the Rebbe says, the Ma'orei Naim. Omnom Efshaloma, one could say, Ulafarish Kavonas HaMaimer, to explain this whole pericope. Al Pi Masha Noida Ki HaTorah Nikris Torah's Chesed. He's going to set up the Torah into the Torah and Torah's Chesed. Remember, I've been talking always about there is emes, and then there's emes lamito. There is truth, and then there's truth to the innermost. Sometimes the truth to the innermost could be the opposite of what the external truth looks like. Truth and truth to the innermost. He's going to set this up. Torah and Torah's Chesed. Remember, in Mishlei, every Friday night on Eishes Chayil, we say about the Shechina or our wives or the divine feminine, the Torah's Chesed al Lashona. Shouldn't it be Torah al Lashona? Pia posma v'chosma. Her mouth opens up with chochma. Remember, this is from Mishlei, which is wisdom literature. It's all about chochma. The Torah's Chesed al Lashona. Maybe there's something different when you're positing Chochmah and Torah's Chesed versus maybe the ritual Torah. Let's see what Torah's Chesed means for him. Shehi Midas Ahava. Oh, Torah is everything. Torah's Chesed is an aspect of Torah that has within it the midah, the archetype, the Platonic ideal of Ahava. Now, in Plato, the notion of the ideal upstairs in the Platonic worlds of the sublunar planets, everything down here in our world is a mere poor replication of the real ideum, the ideal of that object. So this table that I'm learning on has upstairs the idea of table, the archetype of table, upon which every table in the natural world is a holographic image. Torah's Chesed, then, is that part of Torah that mirrors the midah of Ahava, the archetype of Ahava, or in the Sephirotic chain, in Neoplatonic Kabbalah, it would be the midah of Chesed, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes. Chesed would be on one side, the right side, the dextra. Gevura would be on the sinister side, sinistra, the left side, the stern judgment. And Tiferes would be the combination, the balance between the two. So Torah's Chesed is the midah of Ahava. Ulakach ika ha'avodah shel esek ha'torah v'kiyum ha'mitzvahs hi me'ahava. And now he makes the outrageous claim that the ikar of Torah and Kiyum HaMitzvahs must come from that spiritual realm of Ahava. Mipnei she'ahava hi mamish midas haTorah im Tariag Mitzvahs. And there's a Kabbalistic numerology of 613 versus 620, whatever it is. But apparently, the midah of Torah is not just keeping the mitzvahs like a robot, the Tariat mitzvahs. There has to be an ingredient of passion, of passionate love, the way Rabbi Akiva interpreted Shir HaShirim. Now, this isn't the religion I was brought up with. I was brought up with do the mitzvahs, do the halacha, and you'll get a reward. What is this business about loving the divine? The Rambam would be turning in his grave if you read his Sefer Ahava. How is it possible to come to the love of the divine? It's an intellectual, spiritual contemplation. There's nothing to do with this feeling of love. That is the use of some lowly emotion. So what is he talking about? Though access to this divine love, this archetype of love, this love that's upstairs, hidden within the recesses of the spiritual pleroma, al yedei sheyesh kama ahavos nefulin shehein pri novelos be'olam hachesed. Everything that we have down here is connected to the idea upstairs, the archetype upstairs, through this intermediate, some would say heretical, intermediate, semi-divine, sephirotic spheres, these spiritual spheres that are split into 10, Keser, Chochma, Bina, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus, these 10 points of light, these spheres of light that mediate between the infinite divine and the finite world. And you have to access the infinite world of the divine through these access points. Okay, and one of the access points is Ahava, Chesed. Well, how do I do that? There we have this Gnostic notion that our world is a fallen world, most expressed in by the great poet Milton in Paradise Lost, who I maintain had a Rebbe who taught him Pirkei de Rebbe Lezer in London in the 1600s, and is the first to talk about the fallen angels, and the greatest fallen angel being Satan is a fallen angel. He was upstairs, the Metatron. Everything comes down into this world and becomes glaciated, fructified, crustaceous, and becomes fallen into the Gashmiistika world. But the only access point, he tells us dramatically, to access that world of love is to go through the Ahavat Nefulin, the fallen loves, Shehein Pri Novelos. They're kind of the drippings that fall down from above, from the Olam HaChesed. Behem Nefula B'Shvira Meluboshim B'Avas Chitzoni, and they come down through the Lurianic breaking of the vessels. And they are enclosed with the externalities of love and passion that we see in the world around us. So now he's telling us the spiritual path. You want to access the love of the divine, you have to first be aroused to love. Never mind what the object of the divine is, the object of the love. First, you have to have this arousal of the loving matrix of the archetype, this emotion of love, al yedei, through the technique of being mitorer, eze ahava shum davar, afilu chitzonios, even those external loves. Oz nakel lo lahachnis ahava hahibit pnimius hakadusha, le'ehov ahava. So then it'll be easier for you. You have a wormhole into the love of the divine. There is a Buddhist school that actually employs that mantra. It's called Tantric Buddhism. And if you just Google it, you will see in Tantric Buddhism, the way to get enlightenment is precisely through the body and through the bodily passions. We also know that the two schools of thought in Greece, Apollo and Dionysius, had opposite views of approaching the pleroma of the gods. Apollo being a highly intellectualized, think of Aristotle, and Dionysius being through the exploration of the body's passions through inebriation and orgies. But the entrance to the cult and the temple of Dionysius is gnoste tom, know thyself. You cannot understand the divine until you understand yourself. I always tell you the story of the Yida Kodesh, who was walking with Reb Simcha Binim of Pshischa. These are the two pillars of the revolution in Hasidus that we know as Kotsk. They were the teachers of the Kotsker Rebbe. And the Yida Kodesh asks Binim, he says, Binim, so what's your pasuk? What's your favorite pasuk? Which is your soul tied into? And Binim says, Ani histalkalti b'shamayim mi bara eila, and quoting a pasuk from Isaiah, I looked up to the heavens and I'm just completely bowled over to think, mi bara ele. I am awestruck. There's no love there. I'm awestruck by the myriads and myriads and billions of galaxies within galaxies. I'm just awestruck by that, right? That's the poetry of Lawrence Krauss when he talks as an atheist. He tells us, you don't need God. You just can be awestruck by looking at this new telescopic images of the world, and it just completely bowls you over with awe. That comes from Yira. and the Yiddish Kodesh says to Binim, de bist a goy? Any goy can look at the sky and say that. What makes us characteristically Jewish? What is this inheritance that we have in our powerful myth? So Binim says to the Rebbe, so tell me, what's your pasuk? He says, Onochi Hashem Elokecha. Now, if you look at that like a Litvak, he'd be saying the same thing. Who is the author, the creative design, the creative intelligence, intelligent design? There must be that's not what he meant. He's a Hasidic Rebbe. And the absolute revolution in Hasidus that is Pshischa is that you don't look out there for an external experience. They stopped drinking and they stopped the wild dancing in Pshischa. It was all inside. They davened completely silent, standing up in the Shmona Esrei. If you shockled or had your tzitzis hanging out, they throw you out the window like they did to Reb Leibel Eger. There's no manifestation of outward piety. That would be the worst avodah zarah in Pshis. So what does he mean when he says, Onochi Hashem Elokecha? You have to find the Hashem Elokecha in the Onochi. Onochi. It's in your Onochi that you have to discover your higher power, as I said earlier. And how do you do that? Shenit orer bo laboire boruchu. You have to access it through these ahavat nechitzonius. You have to first experience that passionate love for something down here in the world. And then what? Ulahagbia ulahafshita milvush chitzoni. Then, like in Tantric Buddhism, you don't act out on it. You never act out on it, because that's going to be stuck in the blotter. You'll be stuck in the gashmias of it. You have to strip it from its external manifestations. So if you have gone to this Zoina, this Matronisa, why did they go to the Matronisa? They wanted to try to access the divine because nothing else was working. They did all the davening, they did all the martyrdom, they did all the learning and steiging, and that wasn't working. They still got the Gzeira from Rome. So they saw that God still wasn't pleased, and he's sending them this Gzeira. He's still not happy with all their hishtadlus. There must be another way. So what do? They go to this Zoina and say, we want to tell us what to do, meaning tell us how to access the divine through the Gashmias, through Dionysius, through Tantrism. And she says to them, hey, look here. All the Gedolei Romi come to me. And they say from her, not the acting out, that's what they saw, but what they saw from her is the instruction of this radical new approach. And the radical new approach would be to mit orer al bo eze ahava. You take what comes to you as a message from the divine, like Reb Nachman says. Every Yetzer Hara that you have is another message from the divine. So what do? Nit orer bo laborech baruchu. How do I connect to the divine, to that archetypal divine love? It is lahagbia ulahafshita, to strip it from the mere lowly external levushim, this external lust that you have, and realize that the lust that you have is the fallen love of the divine. What a radical notion. And And then you can use that wings, those wings, that transport vehicle of the Hisoirus for that passion, for the passion of the divine. But then the Umas Ovdei Avodah Zarah, they do the same thing. Well, Mishtamshim ba'avos hanafulim bechitzonius, they just stick with that. They don't get out of that. They are addicted to the lust itself and cannot escape it. Shezehu sod golus haTorah v'amidas. And that is the concept of the golus of the Torah and the golus of the Shekhinah. It is an absolutely stunning, it's a stunning, stunning metaphor. So I want to end up by sharing with you, if I may be permitted, a poem I wrote. And I was bringing my father-in-law, Oliver Sholem, from New York to Chicago, and we had to pay for an air ambulance. He'd had a stroke, he was on a ventilator, but we needed to bring him to our house to take care of him. So we had an air ambulance, and the air ambulance was 12 feet wide, quite long, and it was a jet, and there was room for his stretcher and one chair next to him, which was for me. Now, normally an airplane goes at 30,000 feet, 36,000 feet. Because of turbulence, this little jet, this little pishy jet, was going at 40,000 feet. It was so high that when I looked out the window, I could actually see the circle of the globe. Another 10,000 feet, we would have been in outer space. And I was tittering. I mean, I'd never been that high in the atmosphere. And we were that high, plus the higher you go, the quicker you get to Chicago. So I wrote the following. I said, the Shekhinah at 32,000 feet. At 32,000 feet, one is allowed to let the mind wander. At 32,000 feet, certain thoughts are permitted, no? Lord, can you allow me certain thoughts at this altitude? Will you permit me thoughts unacceptable and inappropriate at ground level? Up here, I am close to the heavens. Can we agree? Up here, the blue sky seems more pure and eternal. Up here, the burden of my own mortality is lifted momentarily. Up here, I feel the license to say things not allowed down below, thoughts that would be misinterpreted down there. So permit me some heretical thoughts, maybe. For up here, I fear less the inner critic. Up here, my flight attendant has been inexplicably liberal in the administration of Bloody Marys. By the way, they did have some alcohol on that jet. Let me then express what I would never dare down there. Let me invite you to feelings not revealed. Let me in on what you already know, since you are so intuitive from that which has hitherto been congealed. The transgressives include you, my dear. You, the Shekhinah, beyond the professionalism and the propriety. The learned intellectual discussions over Pinot Noir and the Netziv. The heart has no boundaries, you know, of course, and the heart will have its way no matter what the consequences. For the divine operates under atmospheric conditions, and today, surprisingly, the sky is blue, the heavens have an azure clarity, which means the real truth is present and obvious, which means down below we are in trouble. So forgive me a while under the Mariological influence of the Bloody Mary, of a deadly combination of sky blue and the redness of this inflammatory concoction, and reminiscences of the Black Madonna of Shestachova. At least the vodka in the Bloody Mary survived. Allow the inner critic, wife, mother, for whom I mourn thrice daily, a moment's reprieve. Up here at 32,000 feet, where all barriers to expression may be removed, for a while I can say the following and not pay the price down below. I love you, my dear, and through you I love her. Through the very transgression, beyond the rule book, beyond the halachic, beyond the appropriate. For she, with a capital S, makes demands on me, and I have little idea how to handle her with a capital H. Despite my age and struggles, she still thinks, demands satisfaction that is possible. Strung between the feminine, the wife, the mother, the Shechina, the Ramak was correct. Between every woman I have loved and the law, here I am today, this moment, my tears and my heart in unison. The head games are out of the picture up here, thank goodness or godness. The reality of life, love, and death so clear, and the knowing heart fills my being with no higher criticism, biblical or psychological, to account to. I am writing at 32,000 feet, a dizzying height even without vodka, but my fingers are merely gliding over the keyboard. A demoness has possessed them for a few. The words flow like the red liquor. The censor is off duty. We have fooled it at 32,000 feet. And outside the eternal blueness, but inside the Bloody Mary lingers a little longer, imbibed in the incarnation of Mary, Shechina, you with a capital Y. I am at peace, if only for a few.